This morning, we are following breaking news, and that's that the FDA has officially granted full approval to Pfizer's vaccine. Health experts, meanwhile, are hopeful this green light from the FDA will convince some of those vaccine holdouts to get their shots. Now, for more on this, I'm joined over the phone by CBS News reporter and guy who has been following all things FDA for months now, Alex Tin. Alex, what do we know?
Well, we heard in a release this morning from the Food and Drug Administration that their months-long review of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine, that's the one that's under emergency use authorization right now, has finally won full approval from the regulator. Now, to be clear, we have known for months that Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine was safe and it's effective. We had data in the real world from health agencies, from foreign countries, from academics. But really what this key move does is do two things. Number one, obviously, there's a hope that it will overcome vaccine hesitancy, especially among people who have cited this lack of full approval as a reason for not getting the shots. But also, in that same vein of, boosting shots in the country, we know that there are many companies, many institutions, including United Airlines, including the Pentagon, that have said that they are at least delaying their COVID-19 vaccine requirements until at least one of the shots gets full approval. And, of course, we now have that.
Now, Alex, why does just the Pfizer vaccine get this full FDA approval? Does it mean that there's something wrong with the other vaccines, or was the Pfizer vaccine just kind of further ahead down the line?
Well, I think the latter of those two answers is exactly right. The full approval process is interesting. It is something that's carefully laid out in the law. It's something that the FDA is required by law to go through in terms of, yes, the emergency use authorization had this unprecedented amount of data showing that the vaccines were safe and effective. But there is a third component of that, something that, is at some level just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but at some level is important for the FDA, especially as they look to the long-term use of this vaccine. And that's a really careful scrutiny of two things. The first is obviously the safety data that has accumulated over the months since the vaccine was given emergency use authorization. But the second part, which is more important, is these inspections and detailed reviews of the manufacturing processes that are used to make the vaccine. Yes, we know right now that the vaccine is safe. Yes, we know it's effective. And yes, we know most of these batches are working just fine. But in these very detailed, scrupulous reviews of manufacturing sites run by Pfizer all around the world, they're really carefully testing and looking at all these sites to make sure not just are they working right now, but do they have the safeguards to address things when they go wrong, right? And that's a very detailed process that Pfizer was the first to say it had finished essentially submitting data to begin back in May. Moderna says it hopes to finish submitting data to begin that process this month. Johnson & Johnson has yet to finish submitting data for its process. But essentially, that's the reason why Pfizer got there first. They were the first to submit data to begin this process.
But these vaccines were already deemed safe enough for mass distribution. I mean, I have one. I think you have one. So
I do.
Is it right to make people nervous that all the safety protocol hadn't been done before now? Can you explain a little bit more what the difference is between the emergency authorization that enabled a lot of us to get this vaccine, and you said it'd have to cross the T's and dot the I's? What, safety, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, well, it means a few things. So, for example, right, we know that the process to create these vaccines on paper is safe and effective. And we know from batch testing that happens all the time of these vaccines as they roll off the line, that in those situations, when they test the vaccine, when they look for issues, it looks fine, right? A very specific and rigorous, scrupulous review of the data that's submitted by the vaccine makers from all of these factories is looking for issues that might arise after all this scrutiny leaves, right? After everyone is no longer paying super close attention to every dose that rolls off the line, after everyone is no longer paying close attention to exactly how the manufacturing process is running. There's a lot of scrutiny right now during the emergency use authorization around that. That scrutiny, obviously, over time, especially over the next few years, is going to wane. And the hope is that through full approval, you get a really thorough vetting, not just of how the vaccine manufacturing process is running right now, but what kind of safeguards they have for future years and future months and future issues that we don't know, that hasn't arisen yet, but potentially could arise in the future.
If someone didn't trust the vaccine enough to get it, does this FDA approval, in your opinion, we just spoke to a doctor who says she doesn't think it's going to convince a lot of vaccine skeptics. Is the hope that it will, and do you think that it will? Is it enough of a hurdle, of a stamp of approval that it could get some people to finally get convinced to get their shots?
Well, the polling suggests, and you can look at, for example, the Kaiser Family Foundation has a great regular poll that is looking at this, right? That suggests that there's at least a small percentage of people, we're talking single digits, that potentially could be persuaded by full approval of the vaccine. But really, the hope is that beyond that, what this does clear the way for is not just, persuading some of those people to come over the fence and say, okay, now I've suddenly been convinced that it's safe, even though we have all of this overwhelming amount of data that it's already safe and effective. The real hope is about those vaccine requirements, right? We know that in many situations, in many countries, and in past epidemics, that once institutions start levying those vaccine requirements to keep their employees safe, to keep their students safe, to keep, the people in their buildings safe, that is a powerful incentive for people to get the shot so that they don't have to be getting, say, for example, a COVID-19 test every day when they come to work, right? Those are the kinds of requirements. Right, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, and even more possibly than convincing vaccine skeptics, I think the hope is, and tell me if I'm wrong, this approval, the final FDA approval, will enable workplaces, schools, possibly the military to start mandating these vaccines.
Exactly. And, the military is a great example, right? We know that the military has said that they were planning on implementing or adding the COVID-19 vaccine to their list of required immunizations for active duty service members. But they also said that they weren't planning on rolling that out right now, and that they were going to either wait for FDA approval or wait to some point in mid-September. Now that there is FDA approval, that process is going to be accelerated.
Do you have any idea when we could start seeing approval for the other vaccines, the Moderna one?
Right. So Moderna, they expect to submit or finish submitting data to the FDA sometime by the end of this month. That's what they told investors recently in an earnings call. Based on that timeline, based on the timeline we know now from how Pfizer's vaccine rolled out, we know that the agency has been aiming to finish essentially processing these reviews after submission is completed within around 3 to 4 months. So assuming Moderna does hit its goals of finishing submitting data this month, add 3 to 4 months, and that's roughly when we expect full approval to come. Johnson & Johnson has said it plans to finish submitting data for its full approval by the end of this year. We don't have more detailed, information on when exactly that might occur. But again, they hope to finish submitting data by the end of this year.
Alex, you are an encyclopedia of vaccine knowledge. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.